Hey all, so a few episodes ago, maybe it was 2 episodes ago, we actually did a recap of some of our older videos on Plant One On Me, and I actually really like doing that because I think actually after 5 years we have over 700 films that we have shot. So that's including all the Plant One On Me's, the vlogs, and the 365 days of plants. So that's a lot of episodes, and sometimes I even have to go back to my older episodes just to remember some of the things that we'd actually seen, because now in countless times I go and see plants and I'm like, I definitely have seen that one before, but where did I actually see it? And it usually was like in an older episode. So this time I thought about all the cool private botanic collections that we've seen at botanic gardens that the public never gets to witness. And we've actually seen quite a few here on Plant One On Me, and to my knowledge, they're not collections that people ever really see again because the press is usually not interested in them. They usually don't allow camera crews, behind in the research collections. So I could think of 5 that we have seen that I think are some of the best. I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't other private research collections at other botanic gardens, but I haven't seen them. So I might as well just recap the 5 that we have seen and reminisce, and you could watch the full episodes here on Plant One On Me. Okay, so the first fortuitous private collection that we had seen took place in Hortus Botanicus in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and we just happened to be filming at the Hortus during the same day that they brought in the pelargonium collection. Now, pelargoniums are geraniums, and it's definitely not a plant that I really took notice of, particularly as a house plant. I mean, I have a couple geraniums, obviously you could buy some pelargoniums outdoors. Most of the time they're not hardy. And oftentimes the ones that get sold in the markets, especially because I'm in a zone 5, zone 6, oftentimes the ones that get sold on the markets are the ones that smell like citronella and lemon drops. And if I just kind of go back a bit, one of the things that I was kind of astonished by with pelargoniums is the scent that they have. I mean, the range of scent that they have. So I was aware going into the collection that pelargoniums have a scent of maybe rose, or that citronella that they often sell, or lemon drops. But I really didn't know the extent of the scents after that. And it just so happens that a gentleman there who's like an amateur horticulturalist who loves pelargoniums actually took us through. I think he'd been retired for 12 years, so he's probably retired for many more years since we shot that very early. But he had always grown pelargoniums, and he came to see this collection, and he knew quite a lot about it. So we had to do this kind of translation from Dutch to English. But I think one of the things is that plants are a common language, and it's something that you really understand. And especially with pelargoniums, you could touch the leaf, you could smell the leaf, and you really understand without exchanging words, which is brilliant. So back to the scents. Some of the scents that we had experienced are like root beer and like Coca-Cola and dirty socks and wet dog. So not all of them smell like roses, but also I got to appreciate a lot of the forms of pelargoniums. So some of them had leaves that looked more like carrots, like carrot tops, and others had like really succulent, very furry leaves. You had some that looked like more like caudiciforms and along those lines. And what I love about seeing these private collections is that you really get to see all or a lot of the genera all in one place. Now, I will say what was interesting about this collection at Hortus is that a university had been basically either lost their funding or stopped their funding for this collection. And that they asked Hortus if they wanted to take the collection, and Hortus was like, oh, I don't know, because then now we have to allocate budget for this collection. And it's a collection that no one's ever going to get to see because it's a research private collection. With the idea of keeping the genes alive of these plants, because, once something is in production and goes out of production, or once something is in someone's collection and then gets out of the collection, oftentimes you're not going to be able to find that plant again. There's oftentimes that we go to nurseries and stuff like that, and they say, hey, you know, this at one time was in circulation, but now it's not, and we don't know where it exists. It may exist in some people's gardens or in some people's beds, but that's about it. So it was a very kind of iffy time for hortists, because they're like, you know, should we take this on? But if we don't, all of this is going to get lost. You know, this library of genetic diversity of all these genes, especially because a lot of the pelargoniums in the area where they're from, many of them in South Africa, are no longer in existence or threatened or endangered. So that was a very imperative move for them, and I'm glad that they actually got the collection, and I'm very, very glad that we were there that day that we could actually film it. And to my knowledge, I don't think you could see the pelargonium collection anywhere else but on Plant One On Me. Okay, so I would say that the next two are from the same garden, and that is our tour to Thailand in the Nong Nooch Botanic Gardens. And, you know, my oh my, I mean, that is a garden to be experienced. I mean, it is a bit more like a theme park. And so I know some folks, especially folks who may not have kids, might not find interesting. So hardcore plant folks with no kids are not going to maybe really want to take themselves to a theme park, for instance. But, you know, families loved it, kids loved it, because you had these ginormous like dinosaurs and animals that I have to say it was pretty impressive, because they were handcrafted, basically like giant paper mache animals, handcrafted by local people and then hand painted, meticulously hand painted. So even if you don't appreciate the theme parkness of it, which draws in a lot of the folks there, the fact that it's got some artistry to it, I think, is something that many of us can actually appreciate. But I think the biggest thing I can appreciate is that what was happening behind the scenes at Nong Nooch. And they were using theme parky experience in order to do plant conservation in the back end. So the founder named the Nong Nooch Botanic Gardens after his mother. And, you know, he's kind of the real brains behind the operation, and just really thinks it's important to do plant conservation. And so they have, to my knowledge, the largest Hoya collection in the world. If you do a cursory research, like on a Wikipedia or something, and usually Wikipedia is a good thing to turn to first, but it's usually not the research that you want to end up with, you know, for, you know, all different reasons. But typically, if you go to like maybe Wikipedia or somewhere else, they'll say, oh, there's 300 or 400 different species of Hoya. Well, they think that it's probably closer to 500 to 600. I mean, of course, there has to be genetic analysis that is done, but it was pretty impressive. We went behind the scenes and just saw all these Hoyas, and what they usually have is one Hoya that is growing up and the same Hoya that's also growing down in a hanging basket, because some prefer to They grow better hanging, and some of them grow better growing up like this trellis of sorts. So, I mean, it was just acres of Hoyas. I mean, it was unbelievable. And it had, you know, they had them under a shade cloth. And I remember I was asking Anders, who actually had taken us through the Hoya collection, and I tell this story a lot on Plant One On Me. When I was growing Hoyas, because they were so succulent, I was growing them under like heavier light, like something that I would grow like a typical cactus under, and not an Easter cactus, for instance. And he said, yeah, we were actually doing the same thing, and then we just started to do shade cloth, and we realized that they actually started to perform better. So I think that's a common mistake that comes from Hoya, you know, people growing Hoyas, whether it's indoors or even at botanic gardens. The next thing I would say, besides the Hoyas, so if you want to go check that one out, that's a whole separate episode, and we'll link to it here. But the next private collection we saw at Nong Nooch would totally blow your socks off for any cycad lover, because they are the #1 producer of cycads. Like, I think he told me in 1 year they produced like 1 million cycads. So they actually, you know, take them from seed and then make them into like little young adults. And actually they started to introduce some of the more endangered cycads and basically flood the market with them on a more commercial level, which we were discussing. I was like, I think that would be brilliant if like you could take some of the pressure off cycads, because cycads, along with cacti and succulent, are some of the most, I wanted to say pirated, basically, stolen plant material, because they are so rare, and some of them are extinct in the wild, some of them are completely endangered, some of them are threatened. There's others that have obviously made it into the market that are in the commercial market, but usually like one or two of them. I'm thinking of one of the zamias, and I'm thinking one of the Cycas revoluta are the two that you most see in like a supermarket or a plant nursery or your independent garden center, anything along those lines. So he really gave us the full tour of the cycads there. And he even has a cycad that's named after him, Cycas lindstromii, because his last name is Lindstrom. But I was very thankful that we traveled quite a bit of a distance in order to get to Nong Nooch, and it did not disappoint. So, and then there's several episodes of Nong Nooch because we did spend quite a bit of time there. So, indulge yourself if you've already watched them, indulge yourself again, because like I said, sometimes I have to actually rewatch some of the episodes just to remember. And, as an aside, a little diversion story, when I was in Philadelphia at Ill Exotics, I had seen a specific species of orchid, and I'm like, I have definitely seen this orchid before. And I was trying to remember where it was, and then it dawned on me, I had seen it at Nong Nooch, not the same species, but in the same genus, and it kind of forms this like basket shape. So you really have to jog your memory after seeing literally thousands and thousands of plants. It's very hard to retain all of that information, and I do try, but as the years go on and you start to see more and more plants, it gets a little harder. So I'm very glad that we have all these videos documented, because it even jogs my memory and makes me think like, oh man, that's kind of cool. I mean, I'd love to go see that again, or see something different. This is an oldie but a goodie as well. Don Miller at Fort Worth Botanic Gardens with the begonia. I feel like I'm playing Clue. Mrs. Peacock with the revolver in the reading room. No, Don Miller at the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens. So Don practically single-handedly, he actually also has a begonia named after him. He single-handedly brought begonias into the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens, and now has, I think, the third largest collection of begonias. At least when we were there, it was the third largest collection. Who knows, a few years have passed. Maybe they have the second or the first largest collection. I think the first largest collection is in Lyon in France, but I could be mistaken by that. But a large collection of begonias. And I think that I had not, just like pelargoniums, I don't think I had really fully appreciated begonias. And I might not even still fully appreciate begonias. I will say that, because I don't have a lot of begonias in my collection. But what I did come away with is that I really enjoyed succulent begonias. The really thick, some of them are caudiciforms, the really thick, felted leaves, very velvety, like this beautiful verdigris hue of the leaves. And I was like, ooh, wow, those are like, I'm thinking like begonia venosa, I think peltata. I mean, those begonias are just awe-inspiring to me. So I came away really appreciating that, and not even really knowing that begonias had that kind of succulent sister, if you will. And then I also just really appreciated their ingenuity, there's kind of scrappy ingenuity behind taking care of begonias that want a lot more humidity. So some of the ones that we'd see in our vivariums, for instance, that wouldn't necessarily grow well outside in like a regular like pot, like a potted plant. So, and I saw some really cool ones, that time, like begonia, Darth Vaderiana, like those are ones that I don't think many of us had seen until something like that actually, launched on the channel. I mean, so many different begonias, some with like really, really dark leaves, some with spikes on them. I mean, it was very cool. And all they were doing was taking those plastic salad bowls and they were like having them in there with some moss and stuff. And that's how they took care of them. So that's what I mean by scrappy ingenuity. There is a lot of scrappy ingenuity there, and it was like very well organized. And I have to like tip my hat, I'm wearing a hat today, but tip my hat to Don because it was a wonderful tour, and we had to really twist his arm in order to give that tour, and I'm very glad that we did, because it's not only a wonderful ode to begonias, but it's an ode to Don. It's paying homage to the people who have walked before us, who have, helped preserve some of this genetics for us to actually appreciate. And in many cases, a lot of these begonias are not species begonias. Some of them are actually cultivars, but somebody took the time to actually cultivate that specific variety of plant, and that's a lot of hard work too. So I do have to like tip my hat to Don and say thank you for taking a chance on us when we were early in our years and we got to feature the begonia collection at Fort Worth. All right, so the last private collection that I'd like to highlight was one that we did recently, and that was at the St. Louis, Missouri Botanic Gardens. And that was with Emily and Tom and Monica. Emily was really the one who actually took us through the tour of the aroid collection because she is the curator there, and she's been the curator there for quite some time. She had a little brief hiatus where she had left, but she came back, and she loves her job, and you could tell she loves her job, and she treats all of those plants like her children. And she got to show us a range of aroids that I think many of us probably were familiar with and not familiar with. And it was a 2-part series of over 3,700 aroids that she had showed us. Now, I didn't highlight all 3,700, but you get to see the breadth of them. I probably highlighted more like 200 in the episodes. But that was really nice. And then we went with Monica, Tom, and Emily, and they showed us some of their favorite aroids and kind of talked to us about that. And so for any of you kind of tuning in and you don't know aroids, but it's Rhaphidophora, it's philodendrons, it's monsteras, it's a lot of the ones, anthuriums, ZZ plants, like it's a lot of the ones that folks are really interested at this moment in time. And again, this is a private collection. These are collections that maybe a private tour will go and see, but the public doesn't get a chance to see these collections. So, and I think it's really important because botanic gardens are there to educate and to show folks, but I understand that some collections can't be viewed publicly and they need to be more protected, and they might use them for research purposes, for instance, and so they can't be out in the public. But this gives the botanic gardens, like Plant One On Me gives the Botanic Gardens an opportunity to show some of their private collections. So I think that's really important. And then, let me see, we have the pelargoniums. I have my notes over here, that's why I'm looking. Pelargoniums, hoyas, cycads, begonias, aroids. Oh, I have one more actually that I didn't even list on my notes. I can't believe I've almost forgotten about it. So we went to Göteborg, Gothenburg in Sweden, at the Botanic Gardens, which, by the way, that Botanic Gardens is like, oh my God, it is so off the hook beautiful. I mean, both the grounds and also their conservatories and their greenhouses. I mean, just very well done. They have a rockery indoors, like made with tufa stones and everything, that I was like, I'd never seen anything so beautiful. It was so gorgeous. It made you think like, oh, I want a room like this in my home. But it's very difficult to take care of those plants, so they had to really tweak the climate in order to be able to make it perfect for these plants. We had audio issues, by the way, on these episodes, but we got to highlight the Dionysia twice in 2 different episodes in Gothenburg Botanic Gardens. I'd never seen these plants. They're just like basically bun plants. What I mean by bun plants is that they grow in this kind of like little convex shape on rocks. And to my knowledge, they have the largest collection of these. And these plants are highly specialized on rocks and stones in very harsh climate conditions, often found, I think, in places like Afghanistan and Yemen and a number of other places, many of places that are actually going through some sort of war. And they are really interesting structures, and they get these really bright flowers, many of them like bright yellows or bright purples, and all over the bun. So it just looks incredibly exquisite. Some of them have lighter blue kind of leaves, very, very close formed cropped leaves, or some of them have a darker, green leaf as well. But they have to be very particular with growing these plants, and they're of course very slow growing, and they don't even know if some of these actually exist in the wild any longer, because in many of the cases these are in war-torn countries. And some, I remember her saying that if you go on one side of the stone, it could be one species, and if you go on the different side of the stone, it could be a completely other species, and they only grow on that one stone. And I was like, oh my goodness. So you could imagine that there's probably so many different species of these plants that are just unbeknownst to us. And not many people would actually take the trip, a botanical trip out there in a war zone in order to be able to procure some of these plants or study some of these plants. So anyway, I think that these private collections, these research collections, I've said this before, but they really are doing a service for botanical lovers and for even houseplant enthusiasts to really appreciate just a wider selection of plants. And again, seeing all of the genus or most of the genus in one place really gives you an appreciation for the breadth of a genus and the diversity as well as the similarities between members within that genus. So I hope you enjoyed taking this trip down memory lane with me for all the private and research collections. I think we actually highlighted 6, even though I had in my mind that I was going to highlight 5. But yeah, watch some of those older videos. You won't be disappointed. And obviously if you're somebody who's just started to tune in to Plant One on Me, then you get to go down memory lane with us, 3, 4, 5 years ago and get to see some of these beautiful plants. It doesn't get old, really, it doesn't, because some of these plants I could see over and over again and just feel like I'm seeing just something new or something that I hadn't noticed before. Anyway, I hope you all are well, and thank you again for tuning into this channel. And if you would like, please subscribe and hit that notifications button, because every time I launch a video, then you'll know that a new one has arrived. And if you didn't know already, we launched a second sister channel. It's called Flock Finger Lakes, and we highlight a lot of renovation, landscaping, gardening outdoors. So I'm trying to do 2 different channels with 2 different perspectives. So if that's interesting to you at all, then you could go check out Flock, and I will see you in the next video here. Bye guys.